The stars burned cold and silent over the edge of the Devrick system, where wreckage drifted like bones in the void. A single patrol ship, the Solace Edge, cut through the darkness, silent but watching. Inside, human Commander Eli Vance stared at the blinking red alert on the screen. He'd seen hundreds of smuggling routes, hundreds of cargo freighters running illegal arms, stolen tech, rare minerals. But this was different. The signal had come from a known slaver corridor, coordinates that were supposed to be blacklisted and under satellite lockdown. Next to him, his co-pilot and partner, an alien named Ryla of the Heskari species, all lean muscle and bioluminescent markings, studied the scan data with wide, worried eyes. "Life signs," she said, her voice low. "Weak. Dozens. No adult signatures, just children." Eli's jaw tightened. Smugglers using kids was rare. Smugglers transporting only kids was almost unheard of. That meant it wasn't just trafficking, it was something worse. Human-aliens relations had grown over the years, especially after the Unification Treaty, but across the galaxy's edge, evil still found space to grow in the shadows. Eli sent out a silent probe toward the drifting cargo ship, a rusted freighter named Farsight's Pride, and waited as its sensors fed back what they could. No defense systems online, no power signatures except for minimal life support. But the layout, strange. Modified interior hulls, no crew movement. Crew, it's a ghost, Ryla muttered. Too quiet. Eli didn't like it either, but if those were children aboard, there was no waiting for backup. He launched the docking tether, heard it clamp against the freighter with a thud through the ship's frame. And the two of them moved fast. Full armor, breathing gear, stun rifles. The corridor leading into the Farsight's Pride was narrow and cold, its lights flickering like a dying pulse. They moved in silence, careful not to speak. Their boots crunched over shattered glass and discarded wires. The air smelled like mold and blood. And then they heard it. A sound so soft it made Eli freeze. Crying. Faint, repeating. A child's cry, muffled behind a sealed blast door. Eli raised his rifle. Ryla hacked the panel with fast, practiced movements. The door hissed open, and inside, his heart broke. Dozens of children, packed in cages barely big enough to kneel in. Thin, dirty, alien and human both. One of them, a small girl with violet skin and golden eyes, saw him and didn't cry out. She just stared, a silent plea. "No," Ryla whispered, falling to one knee. The children didn't move. They were too tired, too scared. Eli rushed to the closest cage, tried to pry it open with his hands. It was locked with an override system connected to a pulse trigger, a kill switch. Someone had wired the cages to explode if tampered with. Ryla scanned it fast, her hands shaking. "It's rigged. We need the controller, or—" She didn't finish the sentence. Eli looked around. The ship hadn't just been transporting them. It was meant to store them. He noticed feeding tubes. Running dry, waste drains clogged, and shock collars embedded into their necks. This was no cargo run. This was a harvesting pen. His stomach turned. Then the ship groaned, and a red alert lit up in the corridor. Something had triggered a remote return signal. Whoever owned this ship had just found out it had been breached. Eli turned to Ryla. "We need to get them out. Now." She nodded, eyes full of fire. There was no more doubt, no time to wait. Somewhere out there, a monster was coming to reclaim its cargo. But Eli had made a vow long ago, to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. He looked back at the frightened faces, some with hope flickering for the first time in who knows how long. They weren't just going to save these kids. They were going to burn the network that did this to the ground, starting now. The Farsight's Pride rumbled as Eli and Ryla raced to free the children. The ship's systems were already failing, its hull creaking under the weight of years of neglect. They worked quickly, tearing into the cages, using tools from their emergency kits. But the clock was ticking. Every passing second felt like a heartbeat away from disaster. Eli could feel the rush of adrenaline sharpening his mind, focusing his thoughts. The children, some human, some alien, were a mix of bewilderment and exhaustion, their faces dirty and pale from too many days without proper care. They watched Eli and Ryla with wide, trusting eyes, as though they had long given up on being saved. Eli pulled another child from the cage, a tiny human boy with dark, messy hair, who collapsed into his arms, trembling. Ryla worked beside him, her nimble fingers sliding through controls, hacking into the ship's mainframe to disable the remaining traps. Sweat beaded on her brow, but her determination never wavered. "Hurry!" she said, voice tight with urgency. "They're coming." Eli didn't need to ask who. The smuggler fleet was on its way. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the weight of impending doom. No more hiding. The ship had already broadcast a distress signal before they arrived. Now, the attackers would be coming for them, for the children. He had no doubt the smugglers wouldn't hesitate to burn the Farsight's pride to the ground to cover their tracks. "We're not leaving until every child is out," Eli said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing outside the ship. Rayla gave him a glance, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she nodded. She knew as well as he did that there was no turning back. They had to act fast. As the last cage door opened, Ryla's eyes darted to a nearby control panel. The ship's fuel systems were going critical, and it was starting to show signs of instability. A low, rumbling vibration shook the floor. The ship's engines were heating up, leaking dangerous gases. "We've got minutes," she said. "Maybe less." Eli looked over the children, tired, scared, but alive. They were finally free from the cages, but there was no place to go yet. He grabbed a nearby comm unit and called for extraction, but the signal was spotty at best. They were deep in the system now, far from any safe zone. The transmission barely went through, crackling with interference. "Extraction, this is Solace Edge. We need a pickup now," he barked. He could only pray the ship was still close enough to hear. The transmission cut out again, and Eli cursed under his breath. They were on their own. The countdown continued. Ryla moved to the cockpit, checking the controls to see if they could get some kind of propulsion working. "We can't jump. The engines are toast," she said. Eli cursed again, running a hand through his hair. His mind was racing, trying to think of another way out. The sound of approaching engines echoed through the hull, fast, aggressive. "We don't have time to fix this," Eli muttered. "We need to buy some time, give the kids a chance to escape." Ryla was already moving, heading to the cargo hold. "I've got an idea." She glanced back at him, her bioluminescent markings flickering with intensity. "If we can get them into the escape pods and hold off the smugglers just long enough, we might be able to get the kids out before they torch this wreck." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one they had. Eli turned to the children, all gathered together now, huddled in fear. He tried to speak calmly, but his voice carried an edge. "Listen to me, all of you. We're going to get you out of here. I need you to stay close and stay quiet. Do exactly as I say, and we'll get through this." They nodded, though some still seemed unsure, their eyes filled with confusion and fear. He couldn't blame them. They had been through too much. Ryla reappeared, carrying a heavy toolkit and a portable charge pack. "We'll make it work," she said, "but we need to move fast. We'll open the pods and seal them as soon as we're clear. No second chances." Eli nodded and turned back to the children. With one last look at the battered ship, he knew they didn't have much time before the enemy arrived in full force. They had to get to the escape pods, get the children away, and then face the inevitable fight ahead. It was going to be their only shot at survival. No matter what came next, they weren't going down without a fight. The seconds felt like hours as Eli and Ryla moved swiftly through the Farsight's pride, pushing the children ahead of them toward the escape pods. The ship was groaning under the strain of its failing systems, every tremor sending a wave of tension through the air. The children, though weak and scared, did as they were told, their wide eyes filled with both fear and hope. Eli's heart ached as he watched them, but he didn't have time to comfort them. The smugglers were getting closer, and time was running out. As they reached the escape pod bay, Eli turned to Ryla. "We're running out of options," he said, his voice grim. "Can you get the pods launched manually?" She didn't answer right away, her fingers flying over a panel as the alarms continued to blare. "I can't bypass the lockdown without the main command center, but there's an override I can use." Her words were clipped, focused. "Just give me a minute, Eli." He nodded, trying to stay calm, but the sound of approaching ships, the growl of engines, the metallic hiss of weapons powering up was too close for comfort. The smugglers weren't being subtle now. They knew something was wrong. The ship's atmosphere was getting thicker, the life support system struggling to maintain a breathable environment. Eli's hand rested on the grip of his sidearm as he kept an eye on the children. His mind raced through their options. If the pods weren't operational soon, they'd be sitting ducks. He glanced back toward Ryla, whose fingers were flying over the console, her bioluminescent markings glowing brighter with the strain. "Almost there," she muttered. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor. Eli's pulse quickened. The smugglers had arrived. He could hear their voices now, low and grating, shouting orders. They were getting close. Ryla cursed under her breath. "It's not responding. They've sealed the override from their side." Eli gritted his teeth. He was done waiting. He could hear the smugglers' ships docking now, a loud bang against the hull. They were going to board soon. The Farsight's pride was too weak to defend itself. He stepped forward, drawing his sidearm. "Ryla, get the kids into the pods. I'll hold them off." She turned, shaking her head. "No, Eli. We need to stick together." But he was already moving, adrenaline pushing him forward. "Go!" he shouted. "I'll buy you time." He wasn't sure if she heard him. His mind was too focused on the sound of the smugglers boarding the ship. The door slid open with a sudden hiss. The smugglers flooded the room, armed to the teeth, their eyes scanning the room. "Well, well," one of them sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "Looks like we've got company. Thought you'd escape, huh?" Eli's grip tightened on his weapon, but he didn't raise it yet. "You're not taking them," he said, his voice cold. The smugglers laughed. "Oh, we'll take them, but you're a dead man walking." The first blaster bolt shot past him, grazing his shoulder. He dove behind a pile of wreckage, returning fire as he went. His aim was true, and one of the smugglers crumpled to the ground. Ryla's voice echoed from the hallway, faint but clear. "Eli, I've got the pods activated. They're launching now." A rush of relief flooded his chest, but it was short-lived. The smugglers were getting organized now, returning fire, using the cover of the ship's darkened corridors. Eli could hear them shouting to each other, calling for reinforcements. "Get to the pods," he shouted, keeping his voice steady. "Go, go, go." He could hear the sound of the children's small feet scrambling toward the pods, their little voices crying out, urging each other to hurry. Ryla was guiding them, moving with precision, helping them climb into the pods one by one. The smugglers were relentless. Eli could feel his energy waning, but he couldn't stop now. His mind was focused on one thing, keeping the children safe. Every shot he fired counted. The smugglers were getting closer. He was going to have to make a stand here, give Ryla and the children a chance to escape. The next few moments were a blur. Eli moved with purpose, using the environment to his advantage, ducking, weaving, and firing with deadly accuracy. He didn't care how many smugglers came. As long as there was one child left on this ship, he would keep fighting. Finally, with a final push of effort, Ryla's voice crackled over the comms again. "The last pod is clear. We're ready to launch, Eli." The smugglers were closing in. Eli had only seconds left. He took one last look at the children, their faces now safely inside the pods, and nodded. "Do it," he said. his voice steady, resolute. The pods launched, one by one, into the vast emptiness of space, their engines flaring to life. Eli didn't let himself relax until he saw them break away from the ship, heading toward the nearest safe zone. But as the last pod escaped, the explosion rang out. The Farsight's pride went up in flames, debris scattering across the void. Eli watched the explosion in silence. He had done his job. The children were safe. But he knew the fight was far from over. The space around the Farsight's pride was now eerily quiet, the deafening silence following the explosion that marked the end of their battle. Eli stood amidst the wreckage, his breath coming in heavy gasps, his body aching from the fight. The smugglers had been relentless, but they had managed to escape. The children were safe, launched into the deep reaches of space in the escape pods, and now all he could do was hope they reached safety. But there was no time to celebrate, no room for relief. The smugglers wouldn't let it go. They were going to come after him, and they would want vengeance. He knew he'd have to face them again. Eli wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes, scanning the vast expanse of space, looking for any sign of movement. The escape pods were out of range, their tiny forms now specks of light against the dark backdrop of the galaxy. He turned his attention back to the remains of the ship. There was still work to be done. The smugglers had left too much behind, intel, weapons, and possibly even more of their twisted plans. He needed to find answers. As he approached the wreckage, Ryla's voice crackled through his comm. "Eli, you've got incoming," she said, urgency in her tone. "It's not over." He didn't need to ask what she meant. The smugglers were returning. He could feel it in his gut. They'd be coming for him, trying to silence him for good. He quickly ducked behind a piece of debris, the remnants of the Farsight's pride offering him some cover. His pulse quickened as he watched. The dark shapes of their ships emerging from behind a nearby asteroid belt. The smugglers' vessels were sleek and menacing, designed for speed and firepower. They weren't here for a conversation. They were here to finish what they'd started. He gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening around his weapon. "I need a distraction," he said to Ryla. "Something big." He could almost hear her smile through the comms. "I'll give you all I've got." Seconds later, a massive explosion shook the void, lighting up the space with fiery brilliance. Ryla had triggered one of the nearby fuel cells, sending a blinding light into the smuggler's line of sight. Eli didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, darting out from behind cover and firing on the closest ship, taking down one of its thrusters. The smugglers fired back, the impact of their blasts, rattling him to the core, but Eli didn't stop. He kept moving, using the debris of the ship as his shield, weaving in and out of the wreckage to keep them off balance. The smugglers' ships were relentless, their weapons tearing into the space around him. Eli's movements were swift and calculated, his breathing slowed despite the chaos around him, his mind sharp as he searched for an opening. Every move, every shot had to count. He couldn't afford to miss. The smugglers were taking hits, but they had the advantage of numbers. Eli knew this was a battle he couldn't win alone. Just as he was about to make another run for cover, a sharp pain shot through his leg. He staggered, falling to his knees, cursing under his breath. Blood oozed from the wound, but there was no time to waste. His focus shifted to the task at hand. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain. A sudden, unexpected voice rang through his comm. "Eli, get to the escape pods. They've reached their destination." It was Ryla again, her voice calm but urgent. Eli's eyes flickered to the distance. The escape pods were now on course to the safe zone, out of the reach of the smugglers. They had made it. The children were safe. He didn't need to fight anymore, but that didn't mean he was done. The smugglers were still out there, and they would come after him, after Ryla, after everyone he had fought for. They weren't going to let him go that easily. He clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of his decision. He could run. He could get to the escape pods and make it out alive. But there was still unfinished business. The smugglers had to be stopped. He couldn't let them escape, not after everything they'd done. With a final, decisive move, Eli pulled himself to his feet, pain searing through his leg, but his will stronger than ever. He aimed at the nearest smuggler ship and fired. A direct hit. The ship erupted into flames, debris scattering in every direction. The smugglers were taking hits now, and they were losing ground. Eli's heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. His chances of survival were slim, but the smugglers weren't going to have an easy escape. He was going to make sure of that. His comm buzzed again, and Ryla's voice was steady, but laced with concern. "Eli, it's time. The kids need you. Get to safety." He hesitated for a moment, but then he knew what he had to do. He turned back toward the wreckage, ready to make his escape. There was still a long road ahead, but for now he had done his part. He had saved the children. He had ensured their survival, and that was enough. Eli's heart pounded as the remnants of the Farsight's pride drifted further away, its shattered pieces scattering through space. The smugglers were momentarily pushed back, but he knew it wouldn't last. They were persistent, ruthless, and they'd be back in full force. He had no time to rest. Ryla's calm but urgent voice crackled through his comms again. "Eli, the children are safe. They've made it to the station." There was a brief pause before she added, "But we've got a bigger problem." Eli's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" He could hear the strain in Ryla's voice as she continued. "We weren't the only ones targeting that ship. The smugglers have allies. We've just gotten a transmission from an unknown ship heading toward the station. We don't have much time before they arrive." Eli's blood ran cold. The smugglers had allies? That wasn't good. He looked out into space, watching the stars as if they could provide him with answers. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline flooding his veins. "At best, 20 minutes, Ryla replied. "We need to warn the station, but it's too risky. If we send out a signal, the smugglers will know exactly where we are. We need to think fast." Eli's mind raced. There was no time for hesitation. He couldn't let anyone else suffer because of this, not after everything they had been through. He looked at his surroundings, the black void of space pressing down on him, and then a plan started to form. "We'll need to go dark," Eli said, his mind already calculating. "We'll hijack their signal and use it to mislead them. If we can get close enough to their ship, we can feed them false coordinates." Ryla's voice was quiet for a moment, but she was quick to respond. "It's risky, but it might just work. I'll help you set up the interference on my end, but you'll need to be ready to move fast." Eli nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew the stakes were high. If they failed, the station and all those who had just been saved would be in danger. It was all or nothing. They quickly got to work. Eli patched into the smuggler's communication system using a small, portable device Ryla had sent him. He didn't have much time to set it up before their pursuers arrived, but he moved quickly, every action precise. His fingers danced across the interface, bypassing security protocols, injecting the false data. The smuggler's allies would be sent on a false trail, but it was only a matter of time before they figured it out. Eli glanced at the display, watching as the false coordinates were transmitted to the incoming ship. The plan was in motion. He wasn't sure how long it would take for them to realize they'd been duped, but the risk of being found was growing by the second. Ryla's voice came through again, more urgent now. "Eli, they're picking up speed. We've got about 10 minutes before they reach the station." Eli didn't waste any more time. He gave the command to activate the decoy signal. The next few moments felt like an eternity. His heart raced as he watched the smuggler's ship move closer to the coordinates, the large vessel moving swiftly through the stars. He had no doubt they were getting closer to the station. He could almost hear the rumble of their engines, feel the pressure mounting. His mind sharpened. He had to stall them long enough for the station to prepare itself. The minutes felt like hours. Eli's fingers flew over the console, adjusting the data stream to ensure they wouldn't notice the change right away. His pulse raced as the smuggler's ship moved into position. It was now or never. But just as it seemed like they were getting closer to being tricked, a sudden burst of energy surged through the comm system. The smugglers had detected the interference. They were onto him. "Damn it!" Eli muttered under his breath. "There, too quick." The smugglers fired a warning shot, and the ship rocked violently. The shields held for a moment, but they wouldn't last much longer. Eli scrambled to keep up with the changing frequencies, his hands working faster than ever. Every second counted. His focus was razor-sharp as he adjusted the interference. He wasn't going to let them track him down now. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the ship, signaling that the shields had been breached. A wave of panic surged through him, but he refused to let it take hold. He had to keep the course steady. He couldn't let the station fall. "Ryla!" he shouted, voice tense. "We need to get to the surface, now." She didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. I've got an override on their course. I'll take care of it." Eli closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. He trusted her, but time was slipping away. The sound of the incoming ship's engines was growing louder. The smugglers weren't far behind. He turned to face the remaining controls. If they didn't stop them now, it would all be over. He braced himself for the final confrontation. The stakes had never been higher. They were about to face everything they'd fought for, and the consequences of failure were unimaginable. But Eli had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't going to start now. His mission was clear. He had one chance to stop the smugglers, and he was going to give it everything he had. Eli's hands gripped the control panel as the countdown to their confrontation with the smugglers reached its final moments. The ship shuddered under the weight of the incoming assault, and Eli's heart beat heavily in his chest. Every fiber of his being screamed for action. The smuggler's ship was close now, its engines thundering as it hurtled toward them, intent on finishing what they had started. There was no more room for mistakes. The time for subterfuge had passed. They had been buying time, buying space, but now they would have to face the enemy head-on. He glanced at the screens, seeing the smuggler's vessel looming larger. It was a brutal, war-ready ship, armored and sleek, designed for quick strikes and brutal efficiency. It didn't take long for Eli to realize they were not here to negotiate. They were here to end this. "Eli, they've locked onto us." Ryla's voice broke through the tension in the comms. "We can't outrun them. We need to make our stand. Now." He nodded grimly, focusing his attention on the battle ahead. The stakes were clear. The smugglers couldn't be allowed to reach the station. The children, the people, everyone they had fought for, were all at risk. His mind worked quickly, mapping out their options. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. But there was something the smugglers didn't know. Something they underestimated. Eli. He didn't have the firepower to match them, but he had something the smugglers hadn't counted on: ingenuity and the will to fight no matter the odds. "Prepare for impact," Eli called out, his voice steady as he took control of the ship's weapons. His fingers flew over the controls, activating the turrets and rerouting power to the shields. They were going to need all the protection they could get. He gritted his teeth as he looked out the viewports and watched the smuggler's ship charging toward them. The next few moments would be a test of everything he had. As the smuggler's ship closed in, their guns began to fire. The first shot struck, and the ship's hull shuddered violently. Eli's knuckles turned white from the force of his grip on the controls, but he held steady. Ryla worked quickly beside him, diverting power to the ship's engines to give them the speed they needed to dodge the next incoming strike. But there wasn't enough time. The smugglers were relentless. Eli fired back with the ship's weapons, sending blasts of energy toward the enemy ship, but their shields absorbed the hits. with ease. Every shot from the smugglers' guns was devastating, each one causing a tremor in Eli's bones as the ship creaked under the assault. The pain of it was visceral, and for a moment it felt as if everything might come apart. But Eli didn't back down. He couldn't, not when so much was at stake. Ryla's voice echoed in his ear. "We've got to get close. We need to board their ship." Eli didn't hesitate. He made a sharp maneuver, throwing the ship into a hard roll to avoid another round of laser fire. They were now within striking distance, close enough to make a boarding attempt, but it wasn't going to be easy. Smugglers weren't the kind of people who welcomed visitors, especially not visitors looking to end their operations. "Get ready," Eli said. He knew Ryla was already preparing for what came next. The air in the cockpit grew thick with tension as the smuggler's ship loomed directly ahead. Eli wasn't sure if it was the heat of the moment or the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he felt everything slow down. Each decision he made had to count. The ship's hull groaned as they took another blast, and this time the shields flickered. Ryla was quick, redirecting power to keep them from losing everything, but it wasn't enough to guarantee they'd survive much longer. The smuggler's ship closed the distance, and as the two ships neared, Eli engaged the docking clamps, bringing them together with a resounding crash. The sound was deafening as the two ships collided, metal on metal, but there was no time to think about the damage. Eli and Ryla had one shot at this, and they couldn't afford to waste it. They sprinted from the cockpit to the airlock, donning their gear as they prepared for the unknown dangers on the other side. As the airlock cycled and the door opened, they were met with the harsh, sterile lighting of the smuggler's ship's interior. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of sweat and desperation. Eli's senses were on high alert, every muscle coiled, ready for action. They moved quickly, silent as shadows, making their way through the ship. They could hear the footsteps of the smugglers up ahead, talking in low voices as they coordinated their next move. Eli and Ryla stuck to the shadows, moving with precision, avoiding detection as they got closer to the heart of the ship. The deeper they went, the more they realized just how bad things were. The smugglers weren't just trafficking children, they were preparing for something bigger, something far more dangerous. Eli's stomach tightened as he caught a glimpse of a large cargo hold ahead. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. The smugglers had far more than just children locked up. The cargo hold was filled with crates, each one marked with strange, unfamiliar symbols. It wasn't just people they were smuggling, it was something far worse, something that, if unleashed, could bring destruction on a galactic scale. Eli's heart sank as he realized they were up against something much darker than he had ever anticipated. They had no idea what they had just stumbled upon. But they had already come this far, and there was no turning back. It was time to finish this. Minnie, the moment Eli and Ryla stepped into the cargo hold, the weight of what they were about to face hit them hard. The smugglers had more than just children. In the cold, dimly lit space, crates labeled with ominous symbols lined the walls. But what made Eli's blood run cold was the unmistakable movement inside some of them. He didn't need to open them to know what was inside. The sheer tension in the air spoke volumes. His pulse quickened as his thoughts raced. What had they uncovered? They weren't just dealing with illegal trafficking. They had stumbled upon something far worse, something that had the potential to destroy entire systems, maybe even entire worlds. Eli turned to Ryla, his voice low but urgent. "We need to find out what's in those crates. Fast." Ryla's eyes met his, and without a word, they both knew what had to be done. The smugglers were still unaware of their presence, and they needed to keep it that way. They moved quickly but quietly, sliding from shadow to shadow, avoiding the patrolling smugglers. The crates were scattered in rows across the vast cargo hold, some of them half open, while others appeared to be sealed tightly. Eli's heart. He pounded in his chest as they neared the nearest crate. He reached for the side and gently pried open the lid. What he saw made his stomach churn. Inside the crate were not just supplies or contraband, but what appeared to be pods. Small, bioorganic-looking spheres, their surfaces wriggling faintly. A shiver ran down his spine. These weren't typical cargo items. They weren't merchandise. They were weapons. The kind of bioweapon that could obliterate entire populations. Eli quickly shut the crate, his mind racing. This wasn't just about stopping smugglers. The galaxy's safety was on the line. They couldn't allow these creatures to be unleashed. As he pulled away from the crate, his thoughts turned to the children. What had they been brought here for? Were they part of this scheme? It didn't take long for Eli to realize that the smugglers had no interest in the children. They were simply a cover for the real operation, the one that could send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Ryla's voice came through the comms. Her, tone sharp. Eli, I just hacked into their database. You're not going to like what I found. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He knew things were bad, but what could possibly be worse than this? What is it? He demanded, his voice urgent. The crates, she said. They're breeding grounds for some kind of parasitic life form. They're grown in pods, and once they're ready, they'll hatch and infect anything they come into contact with. They'll spread rapidly, decimating everything in their path. Eli's blood went cold. The smugglers were not just smuggling children. They were facilitating the mass release of a weaponized species, one that could spread death and destruction across the galaxy at an unimaginable rate. He looked at the crates again, feeling a wave of rage wash over him. He had to stop this. They had to stop this now. But even as he formulated a plan, the sound of footsteps echoed from down the hall. Eli's heart rate spiked. The smugglers were close. He didn't have much time. He motioned to Ryla, signaling for her to take cover. They ducked behind a large crate, holding their breath as the smugglers passed by, unaware of their presence. Once the coast was clear, they moved quickly toward the center of the cargo hold, where a large control terminal sat. If they could access the system, they might be able to shut down the entire operation. The clock was ticking. Ryla reached the terminal first, her fingers flying over the keypad as she bypassed security systems and firewalls. Eli kept watch, his senses alert to any movement. Every second felt like an eternity. The tension in the air was suffocating. Finally, Ryla spoke, her voice tight. Got it. I can trigger a shutdown of the entire cargo hold. That'll lock the grates down, stop the breeding pods from hatching, and prevent the smugglers from unloading them. Eli exhaled in relief, but they weren't out of danger yet. The smugglers were still out there, and they wouldn't be happy when they found out their operation was compromised. Do it, he ordered, his voice steady. Ryla hesitated for a moment, then punched in the command. The system responded with a loud electronic whine, and Eli felt a shift in the atmosphere. The crates locked down. The breeding pods would remain, dormant for now, but it was only a temporary victory. The smugglers would come looking for them, and when they did, it wouldn't be just a fight for survival. It would be a fight to prevent an entire galaxy from falling into chaos. The ship suddenly lurched beneath them, the whole structure shaking as alarms began blaring. The smugglers had discovered the breach. Time to move, Eli said, grabbing Ryla's arm. They sprinted toward the airlock, their footsteps pounding on the metal floor. Behind them, they could hear the smugglers shouting, preparing to retaliate. They were too close to stop now. As they reached the airlock, the ship's hull groaned again, and Eli knew they weren't going to get another chance. They had to get out now. The airlock door slid open, and Eli's fingers hovered over the control panel. He punched the button, sending their ship into full reverse, slamming them away from the smuggler's vessel. The ship rocked violently as the engines fired, but it was enough to break free. As they flew back into space, Eli took a moment to glance at Ryla. They had averted disaster for now, but the battle wasn't over. There was still so much more to be done. They had to warn the galaxy about what they had uncovered. They had to make sure no one else would fall victim to the smugglers' deadly scheme. And most importantly, they had to make sure the children would never be used as pawns again. But for now, they had survived. And that was all that mattered. Umini. As Eli and Ryla set their ship's course back toward the heart of the galaxy, they both felt the weight of their victory. But it was a victory with a bitter taste, knowing what they had uncovered. The smugglers' operation was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. The children they had saved were safe, for now, but there was still so much left to be done. The galaxy had to be warned. The truth had to be spread before more systems fell victim to the parasitic life forms they had uncovered in the cargo. Hold. As they navigated through the quiet void of space, Eli couldn't shake the images of the pods, the wriggling, dormant creatures inside, and the dark implications of what would happen once they hatched. His mind raced with questions. How many more crates were out there? Who was behind this scheme? And how far did their influence spread? Ryla was just as shaken, but her focus never wavered. She worked quickly, sending encrypted transmissions to various authorities and resistance groups across the galaxy, warning them of the impending threat. She didn't trust the government. They had their own secrets, but there were others, independent factions who could help, who could organize and mobilize a defense before it was too late. As the days passed, the tension didn't ease. Eli and Ryla kept their eyes peeled for any signs of retaliation. The smuggler's ship could still be lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Eli knew they were both marked now, their names tied to an operation that had the potential to bring down entire empires. The threat was real, and it was far from over. The more they learned, the more questions arose. It seemed like the parasitic creatures were only one part of the operation. There was something more, something darker, and Eli couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they traveled through space, avoiding known enemy routes, they came across more and more survivors. People who had escaped the grip of the smugglers. Children, families, entire colonies that had been abandoned, forgotten, left to rot in the wake of the operation. They knew they had to keep moving, keep helping. They couldn't stop now. One night, as they were settling into their makeshift base on a remote moon, Eli received a message. The transmission was short but urgent. "We've found the source. Come quickly, there's no time." The coordinates led them to an uncharted system, one that wasn't on any official star maps. Eli and Ryla didn't hesitate. They gathered their gear and set their course. The destination was dangerous, but they had no choice. The truth was out there. The source of the operation, the heart of the smuggling ring, was waiting for them. When they arrived, the system was dead silent. No signs of life, no ships in orbit. It felt like they were the only ones who had ever been there, but they knew better. Eli and Ryla entered the atmosphere of the planet with caution, landing on a barren, desolate landscape. The sky was filled with swirling clouds, casting an eerie light over the landscape. The air felt thick, heavy, with an unnatural presence. They moved forward, tracking down the coordinates they had received. As they approached an ancient, crumbling facility, they could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. This place had once been alive, thriving with some unknown purpose. But now it was a tomb. The doors to the facility creaked open as they approached, revealing a long-forgotten underground complex. They descended into the darkness, their footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The place had a strange energy to it, something they couldn't explain, something that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The deeper they went, the more they felt it. A presence, an intelligence. It was waiting. The walls of the complex were covered in strange symbols, alien in origin, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As they turned a corner, they saw it, the heart of the operation, a massive chamber filled with thousands of the same bioorganic pods they had seen on the smuggler's ship. But these were different. These were advanced, perfected. The creatures inside were far more developed, and they pulsed with an eerie glow. It was clear now that the parasitic life forms were just the beginning. Something much worse was coming. But before they could make sense of it, they heard a voice. It wasn't in their heads, but it might as well have been, a voice that vibrated in their bones, cold and distant. "You should not have come here." Eli's heart raced. They weren't alone. "Who are you?" Ryla demanded, her voice strong, but filled with uncertainty. The voice laughed, hollow and cruel. "I am the architect of a new galaxy, a galaxy that will bow before my will. You cannot stop what is already in motion." The floor beneath them trembled as the pods began to crack open. The creatures inside stirred, their eyes glowing with a deadly intelligence. Eli and Ryla were standing at the center of something, far greater than they had anticipated. The galaxy was on the brink of destruction, and they were the only ones who knew. They had come to destroy the operation, but what they had found was much darker. There was no time left to plan, no time for second thoughts. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy, one that would require everything they had, and then some. Eli and Ryla knew this would be their greatest challenge. They had to fight not just for their lives, but for the survival of everyone they had ever known. The battle was about to begin.